For over a decade, Drake ruled the charts like no other. Hit after hit, anthem after anthem, he was untouchable. He was the soundtrack of an entire generation, blending rap and pop like nobody else could. But in hip-hop, kings don't reign forever. And when the throne was finally challenged, it wasn't just a small jab, it was an execution. This wasn't just rap beef. This was a battle that destroyed Drake's legacy. A war of words where Kendrick Lamar, the Compton poet, struck with precision so sharp it split Drake's entire empire apart. Drake dropped his final shot, but instead of glory, it exposed cracks in his armor. And Kendrick. He didn't just win, he carved his name into history as the definitive voice of the culture today. We break down the clash that flipped hip-hop forever. Buckle up, because this is the story of the battle that ended Drake's reign over hip-hop has always been more than just music. It was about dominance, streaming dominance, chart dominance, cultural dominance. For over a decade, he wasn't just a rapper. He was the face of the entire genre. When you thought about modern rap, you thought about Drake. He had the hits, the albums, the sold-out tours, and the endless list of Billboard records that seemed impossible for anyone else to touch. From Take Care to Scorpion to Certified Lover Boy. Drake built an empire where success wasn't measured by lyrical ability, but by global reach. But that kind of dominance breeds skepticism. And hip-hop, as a culture, has never fully embraced an artist who avoids battle. Rap isn't just about making hits, it's about proving you can stand in the fire. Can you hold your ground when another heavyweight throws a punch? Can you protect your legacy when challenged? For years, Drake ducked that question. Sure, he threw a few jabs at Meek Mill, at Pusha T, but his strategy was always the same. Flood the market, let popularity drown out the critics. And to his credit, it worked. Until it didn't. Because there was always one name lingering in the shadows. The one rapper nobody wanted to see Drake stand across from, Kendrick Lamar. Kendrick was cut from a different cloth. If Drake was the pop rap juggernaut who turned feelings into hits, Kendrick was the poet warrior, craftsman obsessed with penmanship, storytelling, and message. His catalog wasn't just stacked with hits, it was filled with masterpieces. Good Kid, M.A.A.D. City told the story of Compton like a cinematic novel. To Pimp a Butterfly became the anthem of a generation, blending jazz, funk, and soul with raw, unfiltered truth. D.A.M.N. secured him a Pulitzer Prize, the first rapper in history to achieve that honor. So when Kendrick's infamous Abuscamus Control verse dropped back in 2013, calling out Drake directly among other top rappers, the hip-hop world froze. Kendrick didn't just name drop, he drew a line in the sand. He declared war, promising to compete with and outshine anyone in his path. Drake responded coolly in interviews, brushing it off as just rap, but fans never forgot. That was the moment seeds were planted. The culture knew eventually these two titans would clash head-on. Fast forward to the present. And that collision finally happened. Drake, facing criticism about being too commercial, too formulaic, too reliant on trends, decided to silence his critics by going after the one man who had always been positioned as his opposite. This was supposed to be Drake's last shot at solidifying his legacy, proving once and for all that he wasn't just the king of charts, but a true battle-tested rapper. When Drake's diss track dropped, the hype was unreal. Streaming platforms crashed under the weight of plays. Twitter exploded with reaction threads, and YouTube was flooded with live breakdowns. Fans expected a nuclear strike, a lyrical showcase proving Drake had been sharpening his sword all these years. But instead, what they got felt empty. The bars weren't bad, but they weren't great. The flow felt predictable. The punches didn't land the way they should have. Drake sounded less like a confident champion and more like a man trying desperately to remind people of his power. Instead of a devastating diss, it came across like a hollow echo of battles past. Sure, he threw some shots, but nothing stuck. For an artist with everything to prove, it was underwhelming, dangerously underwhelming. And then Kendrick responded. If Drake's diss was a spark, Kendrick's was a full-blown detonation. The track didn't just respond, it annihilated. From the very first bar, Kendrick's energy was different. Calculated, razor-sharp. He dismantled Drake's image piece by piece. He questioned his authenticity, mocked his formulaic songwriting, and flipped Drake's emotional vulnerability into weakness. Where Drake relied on surface-level jabs, Kendrick delivered heavy artillery, personal, cultural, and lyrical. One of Kendrick's greatest weapons has always been precision. He doesn't waste a syllable. Every word feels intentional, every bar loaded with meaning. And in this battle, he treated Drake like a puzzle, breaking him down systematically until there was nothing left to defend. By the time Kendrick was finished, Drake didn't just look defeated. He looked exposed. The reaction was instantaneous and brutal. Social media lit up like wildfire. Twitter turned into a battlefield of memes, with Kendrick crowned the undisputed victor before the track even finished playing. Hashtags like #Kendrick won, #Drake destroyed, and #Legacy overtrended worldwide. TikTok creators reenacted scenes of Drake reacting to the diss, spilling drinks, fainting, running out of studios. Instagram timelines filled with fan art of Kendrick as a samurai slashing through Drake's empire. Even mainstream outlets that usually avoid taking sides couldn't help but acknowledge that Kendrick didn't just respond. He dominated. But here's what made the moment so historic. This wasn't just about who had the better diss track. This was about legacy. For over a decade, Drake's critics argued that his empire was built on sand, that when tested by a true lyricist, he'd crumble. And now, in real time, those critics were proven right. Drake finally took the battle the culture had been demanding for years, and he lost. Badly in hip-hop. Image is everything. Once you lose the aura of invincibility, you can't get it back. For Drake, the artist who built his brand on always winning, always staying ahead, always controlling the narrative, this was catastrophic. Kendrick didn't just win a rap battle. He rewrote the story of Drake's career. From now on, when people debate Drake's place in hip-hop history, this battle will be the turning point they point to. And here's the twist: Kendrick wasn't even at risk. Unlike Drake, he had nothing to prove. His legacy was already secure. This battle wasn't about him climbing the ladder. It was about slamming the door shut on anyone who questioned his place at the top. And he did it with surgical precision. So part one ends here with a shot heard around the world. Drake fired his last bullet. Kendrick didn't just dodge it, he turned it back around and used it to destroy the very foundation of Drake's empire. In part two, we'll dive deeper into the fallout, how fans, the media, and even other rappers responded to Drake's downfall, and why Kendrick's victory wasn't just a battle won, but a historic moment that redefined the future of hip-hop itself. The moment Kendrick's diss dropped, the world of hip-hop went into shock. Within minutes, it wasn't just rap fans dissecting the bars, it was the entire internet. Twitter timelines froze, Instagram feeds flooded, Reddit threads went into overdrive. And even casual music listeners who didn't follow rap beefs suddenly knew something monumental had happened. This wasn't just another battle. This was the battle. The fallout began instantly. Reaction videos started pouring in on YouTube. Fans recorded themselves listening live. And the pattern was the same every time: disbelief, laughter, and then absolute chaos as Kendrick delivered punch after punch. Clips of people screaming, throwing headphones, or running around their rooms mid-track went viral. TikTok creators wasted no time turning the lyrics into trending sounds, layering them over skits of Drake getting roasted in group chats or ducking phone calls. The memes, that's where things got really ugly for Drake. Within an hour, Drake was trending worldwide, but not for the reasons he wanted. Fans plastered Twitter with coffin emojis, comparing Kendrick's diss to a funeral. Edits appeared of Kendrick dressed as the Grim Reaper, knocking on doors labeled Meek, Mill, Pusha T, and finally Drake. Others took Drake's old photos crying courtside, looking tired at concerts, and captioned them with Kendrick's bars. The cultural verdict was swift. Kendrick had ended him. And here's the part that truly cemented the damage. This wasn't just fans clowning online. Media outlets, hip-hop journalists, and even industry insiders started declaring it outright. Complex, Pitchfork, XXL, and Hot New Hip Hop ran headlines, crowning Kendrick the victor. Radio hosts replayed his diss on loop, calling it one of the sharpest takedowns in rap history. Commentators pointed out how calm Kendrick sounded, as if he wasn't even breaking a sweat while dismantling one of the biggest stars on the planet. The contrast was devastating. On one side, Drake, a global superstar, visibly straining to prove he could hang in a real battle. On the other side, Kendrick collected surgical, obliterating his opponent without even raising his voice. It wasn't just a loss for Drake. It was humiliation. Loss for Drake. It was humiliation. Other rappers began weighing in too, and this is where things spiraled even further. Some did it subtly, liking tweets that praised Kendrick, posting cryptic emojis on Instagram. Others went direct. Rappers who had long felt overshadowed by Drake's commercial dominance now had the green light to pile on. Suddenly, artists who never dared speak out against him were retweeting memes, joining the roast, or openly declaring Kendrick the new king. Even producers, DJs, and behind-the-scenes figures, people who usually stayed neutral, hinted at the shift. Industry respect had always been Kendrick's currency. But now it was translating into something more powerful: cultural consensus. The people who shape hip-hop's narrative weren't just saying Kendrick won, they were saying Drake's legacy was damaged. And in hip-hop, perception is everything. This is where the conversation started shifting from who won the battle to what does this mean for Drake's career. For years, Drake had built himself as untouchable. No matter the criticism, ghostwriting scandals, corny memes. Being called too soft, he always bounced back by dominating charts and shaping trends. But now, for the first time, he looked vulnerable. For the first time, his dominance seemed breakable. Think about it. Drake wasn't just beaten musically. He was beaten culturally. His greatest weapon, the ability to control the conversation, to spin the narrative in his favor, was gone. No Instagram caption, no TikTok dance challenge, no Spotify playlist placement could erase what Kendrick had just done. Fans didn't just hear Kendrick's diss, they believed it. That's the death blow in hip-hop battles. Winning isn't just about having better bars. It's about shifting public perception so heavily that your opponent can't recover. And that's exactly what Kendrick did. He made Drake look less like a king and more like a fading star, desperately clinging to relevance. The generational divide also played a role. Younger fans who grew up idolizing Drake as the soundtrack to their teenage years were now posting that Kendrick had embarrassed their childhood hero. Older fans, who had always criticized Drake as a pop act hiding in hip-hop clothing, felt vindicated. They celebrated the moment as proof that lyricism, authenticity, and artistry still mattered more than streaming numbers. The battle became a cultural rallying cry. Real rap had prevailed. But perhaps the most brutal part of the fallout was the silence that followed. While Kendrick's diss echoed across the internet like an earthquake, Drake's response, or lack thereof, spoke volumes. Every hour he didn't reply felt like another nail in the coffin. Fans demanded a comeback, but deep down, many knew the truth. There was no comeback strong enough to reverse what had just happened. And let's not forget the business side of things. Brands and corporations who had always aligned themselves with Drake because of his spotless dominance started to waver. Streaming services pushed Kendrick's track higher in playlists. Playlists that usually had Drake front and center suddenly gave Kendrick the spotlight. Even casual listeners who didn't know the history pressed play on Kendrick's diss out of sheer curiosity, and when they did, they became believers. The numbers told the story. Kendrick's response skyrocketed in streams, breaking records for a rap diss in its first 24 hours. Reaction videos collectively amassed millions of views. Hashtags around Drake's funeral trended longer than his diss did. This wasn't just a battle, it was a cultural takeover. And here's the irony. Drake had initiated this. He wanted to prove himself. He wanted to silence his critics. But in trying to assert dominance, he opened the door for Kendrick to redefine the narrative entirely. What was supposed to be Drake's moment of validation became the moment his legacy cracked by the end of the week. The verdict was undeniable. Kendrick didn't just win a rap battle, he reshaped the hierarchy of modern hip-hop. Drake, once untouchable, now carried a permanent scar. And Kendrick. He walked away not just as the victor, but as the man who etched his name into history for delivering one of the most decisive wins rap's ever seen. But this was only the beginning of the aftershocks. Because if part 2 showed us the immediate fallout, the memes, the media, the reactions, part 3 dives even deeper into the long-term consequences. What does this mean for Drake's career moving forward? How does this battle change the way we'll remember him in hip-hop history? And how did Kendrick use this moment to elevate himself from being one of the greats to being the great of this generation? Stay tuned. Part 3 will uncover how this one battle altered the legacies of both artists forever. By the time the dust began to settle, one thing was crystal clear. This wasn't just another rap beef. This was a cultural earthquake that shifted the entire landscape of hip-hop. In fact, by the end of the first week, the conversation was no longer about who won the battle. It had already moved on to what comes next. And at the center of that question was Drake's legacy. For more than a decade, Drake had enjoyed a rare kind of dominance. He wasn't just a rapper. He was a global phenomenon, blending hip-hop with R&B, pop, and even dancehall to create a formula that felt unstoppable. He was everywhere, all the time. His songs weren't just hits, they were lifestyle soundtracks. Whether you were falling in love, going through a breakup, celebrating success, or scrolling late at night, Drake had a song for it. That versatility kept him untouchable for years. But the Kendrick battle changed everything. Suddenly, all of Drake's strengths started to look like weaknesses. His ability to make catchy hooks and crossover hits. Fans now mocked it as formulaic. His emotional vulnerability, once celebrated as refreshing, was weaponized as weakness. His global dominance, instead of being proof of greatness, was framed as evidence that he was more pop star than rapper. Kendrick's diss didn't just land punches, it rewired how people interpret it. Drake's entire career. This is the danger of legacy battles. They don't just decide a winner in the moment, they decide how history will remember you. And for Drake, that shift was brutal. Overnight, the narrative surrounding him went from the greatest of his era to the guy Kendrick destroyed. The long-term fallout was everywhere. On social media, younger fans began creating timelines, comparing Drake's past wins to his recent loss. Almost like a tragic downfall story. On podcasts and YouTube panels, analysts debated whether Drake had ever truly been a lyrical giant, or if his reign was always about streams and marketing. Even diehard Drake fans found themselves cornered, struggling to defend him against Kendrick's dismantling. What made it worse was how clean Kendrick's victory looked. There was no controversy, no cheap shots, no technicalities. He didn't need ghostwriters, publicity stunts, or gimmicks. He just rapped. Pure, sharp, undeniable bars. And in doing so, he reminded the world of what hip-hop is supposed to be about. Lyrical dominance, authenticity, and cultural weight. Drake, by contrast, suddenly felt out of touch. He had always relied on trends, whether it was tapping into UK drill, Caribbean vibes, or TikTok-friendly sounds. But now, that adaptability felt hollow. Instead of looking versatile, it looked like desperation. Instead of being a chameleon, he looked like someone chasing relevance. Kendrick didn't just beat Drake in a battle, he exposed the foundation of Drake's empire. And this is where history comes into play. Hip-hop has always had legendary battles that reshaped the culture. Jay-Z versus Nas, Tupac versus Biggie, LL Cool J versus Cannabis. These weren't just diss tracks. They were defining moments. And now Drake versus Kendrick had joined that list. But here's the catch. In most great battles, both sides walk away with respect. Even when Jay and Nas went at it, both cemented themselves as legends. But in this case, the perception was one-sided. Kendrick didn't just win, he elevated himself to a new tier, while Drake seemed to fall down a rung. For Kendrick, the victory was historic. He was already seen as one of the greatest rappers of his generation, but this battle elevated him beyond that. It wasn't just about his discography anymore, it was about his dominance in the most sacred tradition of hip-hop. Battle rap. He had taken on the biggest star in the world and destroyed him without breaking a sweat. That kind of win doesn't just add to your legacy, defines it. Think about it. Before this, Kendrick's place in hip-hop history was secure but still debated. Was he top 5 all time? Was he the greatest of his generation? Could his catalog alone put him alongside legends like Tupac, Biggie, Jay-Z, and Nas? After this battle, those debates shifted. Now, people weren't just asking if Kendrick belonged in those conversations, they were asking if he might actually top them. Meanwhile, Drake faced the opposite. The one thing he had always avoided was being defined by a loss. His career was built on wins, whether on charts, in cultural relevance, or in narrative control. But now, for the first time, he was being defined by a failure, and not just any failure, but the kind that fans will never forget. Memes fade, but cultural memory doesn't. Every future discussion of Drake's career will come with an asterisk. Yeah, but remember when Kendrick ended him? The damage wasn't just cultural, it was emotional. Drake has always been highly aware of public perception. His music often references criticism, gossip, and how people see him. So this loss wasn't just external, it was internal. He had tried to prove something, and instead, he confirmed his critics' worst arguments. That kind of psychological weight is hard to shake, especially for an artist who thrives on control. And here's the cruel irony. Drake had nothing to gain and everything to lose. If he had beaten Kendrick, people might have respected him more. But it wouldn't have changed Kendrick's legacy. But by losing, he handed Kendrick a crown and scarred his own legacy permanently. It was a lose-lose situation from the start. But he walked straight into it anyway. The cultural ripple effects extended beyond the two artists. Hip-hop itself felt renewed. For years, critics complained that rap was becoming too commercial, too TikTok-driven, too disconnected from its roots. But this battle reminded everyone that bars still matter. That authenticity still carries weight, and that real artistry still wins. Younger rappers took notice too. Suddenly, the emphasis wasn't just on making catchy hits, was on proving penmanship. On writing verses that could withstand scrutiny. Kendrick's victory wasn't just personal, it was generational. So where does that leave Drake? In part 3, the long-term outlook feels grim. His next moves will be heavily scrutinized. Any attempt to reclaim dominance will be compared against this battle. Every new song will be dissected for weakness. Every album rollout will face the shadow of Kendrick's victory. It doesn't mean his career is over. Drake is too big of a star for that. But it does mean his aura of invincibility is gone. And once that aura is gone, it never returns. Meanwhile, Kendrick walks away as the clear victor, not just of the battle, but of the era. He has proven that lyricism can still triumph over popularity. That substance can still crush style, and that one perfectly timed response can rewrite an entire decade of dominance. He didn't just win a rap beef, he made history, and the world of hip-hop. It will never look at Drake or Kendrick the same way again by now. The world had already declared Kendrick Lamar the undisputed victor. But part 4 isn't just about the immediate aftermath. It's about how this battle cements itself into hip-hop history forever. How Drake's image is permanently altered. And how Kendrick elevated himself into the pantheon of the greatest rappers of all time. Let's start with Drake. For years, Drake was hip-hop's anomaly. Most rappers built their legacies on lyrical dominance, street credibility, or cultural movements. Drake built his on universal accessibility. He was the artist who could be played at weddings, clubs, heartbreak playlists, and gym sessions alike. That versatility made him the face of an era. But versatility is a double-edged sword. The same qualities that made him a global superstar also made him vulnerable to critique from purists. He's not lyrical enough. He's to pop. He's an actor turned rapper. He avoids confrontation. The battle with Kendrick forced all those critiques into the spotlight at once. Kendrick didn't just out-rap him. He turned Drake's entire brand against him. What fans once praised as emotional relatability was now framed as weakness. What used to be applauded as adaptability was now seen as trend-chasing. And worst of all, the one thing Drake had always avoided, direct confrontation with a peer who could outbar him, finally happened, and he lost. That's why this moment is so devastating for Drake's legacy. It doesn't erase his achievements. He will always be remembered as one of the most commercially successful rappers in history. But it does redefine how he'll be remembered. Instead of the king of the 2010s, he risks being remembered as the artist Kendrick destroyed when it mattered most. And in hip-hop, moments matter more than numbers. A single defining moment can outweigh a decade of dominance. Just look at Nas and Jay-Z. Nas wasn't bigger commercially, but his Ether moment immortalized him. Similarly, Kendrick's takedown of Drake becomes the headline of Drake's career. But while Drake's image took a massive hit, Kendrick soared. This battle was the final piece in a puzzle Kendrick had been building for years. His catalog already proved his artistry. His Pulitzer Prize already validated his cultural weight. His control verse already demonstrated his competitive spirit. But what he lacked was the moment, the kind of defining head-to-head clash that every great rapper eventually faces. Now, he has it. And not just against anyone, but against the biggest star of the generation in winning. Kendrick didn't just secure a victory. He ascended. He went from being considered one of the greatest to being positioned as the greatest of his era. And when future generations look back on hip-hop, this battle will be cited as the turning point where his supremacy became undeniable. Just like Tupac versus Biggie defined the 90s, and Jay versus Nas defined the early 2000s, Kendrick versus Drake will define the 2010s and 2020s. The cultural impact also goes beyond these two artists. This battle reignited the essence of hip-hop itself. For years, critics argued that rap was becoming watered-down, focused on streaming gimmicks, dance challenges, and commercial appeal rather than lyricism and authenticity. Kendrick's dismantling of Drake was a reminder that at its core, hip-hop is about bars. It's about skill, truth, and competition. It sent a message to the entire industry. Clout and numbers can't protect you in a real battle. Only talent can. You could feel that ripple across the culture. Rappers who had grown complacent suddenly felt pressure to sharpen their pens. Fans began demanding more from their favorites, no longer satisfied with repetitive hooks or formulaic beats. The younger generation, many of whom grew up idolizing Drake's sound, now looked at Kendrick as the standard. It wasn't enough to make a hit anymore. You had to prove you could rap, and that's why this battle wasn't just historic for the artists, it was historic for hip-hop. It reset the rules. Now, let's talk about legacy in the long run. 10 years from now, when people revisit this era, the numbers will still show Drake's dominance. Billboard charts will still reflect his reign. But the conversation, the story of hip-hop, will place Kendrick at the top. Because when the culture looks back, it doesn't care about statistics nearly as much as it cares about moments. Jay-Z doesn't have more #1 hits than Drake, but his battle with Nas keeps him legendary. Tupac and Biggie didn't have decades-long catalogs, but their battles and impact immortalized them. In that same way, Kendrick's destruction of Drake becomes the story that defines this generation. Drake will still be respected, still be influential, and still be celebrated for shaping an era. But Kendrick will be remembered as the conqueror. The warrior who stepped into battle, faced the biggest pop rap star in the world, and walked away untouched. That kind of legacy can't be bought, streamed, or marketed. It can only be earned in the fire of competition. And here's the fascinating part. Kendrick did all of this without sacrificing who he was. He didn't change his style, he didn't chase trends, he didn't compromise. He simply stayed true to his pen, his voice, and his craft. In an era where everyone felt pressure to play the algorithm game, Kendrick proved that authenticity still wins. That's why his victory feels so historic. It wasn't just about beating Drake, it was about proving that hip-hop still rewards purity. So what happens now? For Drake, the road ahead is complicated. He's too talented and too globally embedded to disappear, but he'll never shake the shadow of this battle. Every move he makes will be judged against the moment Kendrick ended him. His music will still chart, but the culture will always whisper, "Yeah, but remember what Kendrick did?" That's the burden of legacy battles. You don't get to erase them. For Kendrick, the future is brighter than ever. He has nothing left to prove. Every album he releases will be seen as a continuation of his greatness. Every verse he drops will be treated as a cultural event. And every stage he steps on will carry the weight of being the man who destroyed Drake. In many ways, he no longer competes with his peers. He competes with history itself. And for hip-hop, this battle will live forever. It will be dissected in documentaries, debated in classrooms, and remembered in barbershops for decades. Fans will tell younger generations about the day Kendrick ended Drake, the way older fans tell stories about NASA's ether. It's no longer just music hits mythology. In the end, the title says it all. This battle destroyed Drake's legacy, and Kendrick made history. The funeral for Drake's aura of invincibility has been written, and the coronation of Kendrick Lamar as the undisputed king of his generation has been sealed. Hip-hop won. And there you have it. History wasn't just made, it was rewritten. Kendrick Lamar didn't just win a rap beef. He cemented himself as the face of hip-hop's golden standard. Drake, for all his numbers and accolades, now carries the scar of a battle he couldn't survive. But here's the question for you. Is this the official end of Drake's reign? Or can he still flip the script and come back stronger? Drop your thoughts in the comments, tag your crew, and let's settle this debate once and for all. Hit that for more breakdowns of the culture-shifting moments shaping music history. Don't just watch, be part of the conversation. Hashtag Kendrick Visdrek. Hashtag hip-hop history, hashtag battle of the decade, at Kendrick Lamar, at Champagneux Poppy, at Complex, at HIPHOPDX, at Rap, because this wasn't just a battle. It was a legacy check. It was a legacy check.